All right. Hi, welcome. The technical difficulties continue, but check that out. That's pretty awesome. All right. This chat is going to be about my experience that I had with Fred Earle, in the only time that I ever met him. And he's one of the greatest coaches ever to teach tennis. There's a legendary story about how his Modesto junior college team beat USC and maybe one of the greatest upsets in college sports history ever. But there's a lot of backstory to that, and I don't want to digress into that. But so yesterday on Facebook, I posted something about how I asked Fred what's the greatest thing that he's ever taught anybody, and people were curious about that. So it wasn't going to be able to be justified by, really captured by just giving a couple of sentences in a comment. So I decided to make a video on this. And really there's actually kind of a bigger message here too. And that's about asking questions, because it's really vital for you and for me to ask questions, because, that's where when we show interest in something, then our brain latches on to the questions that we've asked for ourselves. Because, a lot of people actually just sort of sit quietly and just try to absorb information. But a really good question goes a long way. So, some of you are going to the World Conference coming up, and, not a lot of you, but some of you are going to the World Conference coming up. And so here's what I would say, while you're listening to this presentation, think up one really good question that will not only serve you, but serve the rest of the group. And so this plays into this story about Fred Earle. And there's another one of my favorite quotes that I use often is from Albert Einstein, and it's a longer quote, but the gist of it is never stop questioning, because this is where you keep ourselves active and engaged and thinking and all that. Okay, quick Robert Lansdorp story to show kind of the opposite. So Robert was invited to speak at a conference, and then for a period of time, quite a long period of time, he was showing things that were impossible. And then finally, a German coach from the front row raised his hand and said, "Robert, with all due respect, you're saying something that I can't see how, with any knowledge of physics, how you can make that work." And he said, "See, the rest of you are just sitting there quietly as I'm just telling you, this stuff, and you're just taking it in." So, always have sort of that critical eye. Anyway, so this happened, I don't even know how long ago this happened. It might have been 20 years ago. I'm just going to go with 20 years because my memory of what year things happened is not that great. But, I was fairly new to coaching, but Fred was in NorCal, and he was from Modesto, and he was invited to come speak at our conference. And then there was an opportunity to go to lunch with him, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm getting in this one." So there are like 7 other pros, and it's everybody's chance to sit at the feet of, the absolute master, the grand master. There are a lot of people who have the title master tennis pro, but Fred was the master of masters. So anyway, I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, okay, let's see, don't dominate the conversation, but do ask a good question. So I was like, Fred, what's the best tennis tip you ever gave anyone in your whole life? And when I present this to students, I do the long pause. And yesterday I got some people hooked in because I was like, yeah. And I asked Fred this question, and then people commented, what did he say? Right. So, gotcha. Anyway, so Fred thought about it for a moment, and he's like, oh, I know what it is. When you see the ball bounce, say bounce. And when you make contact, say hit. Okay, now, so I responded, well, yeah, okay. I mean, isn't that a tip from the 70s? Didn't that come from the inner game of tennis? And Fred said, no, actually, that tip, he first heard that in the 1920s. Because at that time, I mean, I think this was maybe in the 90s that I was talking to Fred, and Fred was 93 years old at that time and had been teaching for 75 years. And his son Fritz was the head coach at UCLA for 37 years. Now, the interesting thing about Fred and Fritz is that they were both hypnotists. So, part of the value of the bounce hit thing, and now I already know. It's here. Let me digress for a second, because I know some of you out there are like, oh, that doesn't work. You can't do that anymore. Ball speeds are too fast. Blah 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 blah. Right? Okay. No, not true. So you can still say bounce hit, right? But now, part of the magic of it is that instead of telling someone to keep their eye on the ball or to watch the ball, what you're doing is you're giving them a task that's not complicated, and it actually draws their attention. It demands that they see the ball when it bounces, and that they see it, or they at least feel it in their strings when they're making contact. Because it's well noted that you cannot see the ball at the moment of impact. You just can't. It happens too fast. It's faster than the eye can pick up. But you can see it enter and leave, and you can also certainly feel the ball, and you can time that, right? So the interesting thing also is that from a neuroscience perspective, that particular exercise helps people to defeat their anxiety in sort of an oblique way, not directly. But, one thing that I notice is that quite a few people, when they first start doing that, all right. Rich Nair with the comment. I'm going to get back to that in a second, but thank you, Rich. So, all right, where was I? All right. So one thing that I see when people do that is that they will say bounce before the ball has bounced. And it's not often that people say bounce after it has bounced. But clearly there's this, anxiety issue of being too early and perceiving the ball to be coming faster than it really is. And this is one of the major things that holds people back from being able to rally in the first lesson. And this is one of my big things. I mean, every 100% of my students rally in the first lesson. And I will challenge you this way. If that is not true for you, then you're not doing as well as you can. If you're one of those pros who thinks that people need to perfect their technique before they can start rallying, then you're losing a lot of players. Right. So just this last Saturday, I had someone come out for the first time onto a tennis court ever in their life. And within a few minutes, they were rallying. Right. Now, it was with a red ball, and we let the ball bounce a couple of times. But, it's important to define things so that people can be successful, because she's going to quickly progress. And then, then the next thing was we shortly introduced the orange ball, and then, it's not going to be that long before she's rallying a yellow ball over the net. But she left the court successful. So 100% of my students rally in the first lesson. And this also has a lot to do with some important data that I got from on court, off court, probably 20 years ago. And that is approximately 80% of people who play tennis simply want to rally with their friend for 30 to 40 minutes, work up a sweat, get a workout, avoid pickleball, and go home, right? So terrific. That's great. I mean, if we have 20 million people doing that, every club's full, right? Then the next 15%, and these will be a lot of these people will be club members. They want to play a couple of sets of social doubles. They don't want to be on a USTA team. They will if you force them, but they just want to play a little bit of social doubles, play 2-3 sets in the morning on Saturday or Sunday morning, go home, and not be terrible, not be the worst. And if they win, fine. If not, then, they just want to make some good shots and not feel like they're the worst. All right. And then, but now let's go back to bounce, toss, bounce, hit. Okay. So now here's an interesting thing. I have now adapted it my own way because, so there are different things that can be done with this. Okay. And they are these. And then after I get through this, then I'm going to go through some comments, read some comments and respond to those. So number one, I no longer say hit. And the reason I don't say hit is because it's sort of a tense and willful word. And so the connotations of the words that we use kind of create a way of being. So when we use tense and willful words, then we get tense and willful play, right? And so what I try to do is select words that are more relaxed and passive to make the game easier for people. So I say toss because, if we go back to the roots of tennis, and I learned this from Oscar Wagner, and, it's too bad Oscar's so controversial because he really has a lot of really good content, but, it's hard for people to accept, but, racket, rack is Egyptian for palm, right? So, and look at my little hands. So basically, I always, I tell people this, look, this is my little hand. And now if I put a racket in it, I guess I don't have a racket handy. Now my hand just got over there. Now we're going to play the game like we're catching and tossing a ball instead of all this hitting stuff. Right. So I've adapted that to, bounce, toss. And so that also engenders the receiving skills. And, far too many people spend way too long with the sending skills, that perfect stroke, and far too little time on spacing and having an amazing contact point, so that you're receiving the ball in your string so that you can have a clean contact. There are a lot of people who have absolutely horrible looking strokes who do a great job of getting in position. And then because of that, they can play very good tennis. And so positioning and receiving the ball. And so the interesting thing about saying bounce, toss is that it causes this demand for you to see and sort of subconsciously predict its landing place. And then you get in better position, and then your mind is more engaged with where it's going to be. So it's sort of the subconscious question is, where and when is it bouncing so that I can say bounce at that time? And when and where am I making contact because I need to be able to say toss at that time? That's what's happening subconsciously. All right. So Rich Nair says in the 1920s, it was Helen Wills Moody who, in her autobiography, admitted she must have repeated 1,000,000 times in her career, every shot, every shot, every shot. So, and with creative spelling. Now, Rich, I am not making the connection between that and what I'm saying. I mean, are you saying that she would say every when the ball bounced and shot when she made it? That's what I'm getting from that. David Breslow says, I've always had beginners hitting forehands and backhands and volleys on the very first lesson. That's awesome. So do they rally? Do they rally with you? Do they rally with somebody else? That's my question to you, right? Back to Rich. They called Helen Miss Poker Face. She was so focused and had that phrase every shot in her head that during one of her 8 Wimbledon wins, she didn't see that she had just won the championship and went on to start her serve. The umpire had to tell her to stop and shake hands. You know, and I can relate to that. I've done that myself. But actually, it was mostly in basketball that would happen. I would actually make a winning shot and be so lost in just the play that I'd run back on defense and people go, hey, stop. All right. David and Rich are making friends on LinkedIn right there. David Bresso. Hey, David, good to hear from you. Rich. All right. That's good. Yeah. Keep the party going, people. All right. So, all right. Now, here's a variation that I've recently discovered that has helped a lot of players, including myself. And that is to just eliminate the bounce part and to simply say now when you make contact. Now. And the interesting thing about that is that I find that helps tremendously with keeping people fully present with what they're doing. So sometimes you get people and they're reaching too far out in front to make the shot, or they're, the ball's, kind of attacking them and they're not attacking the ball. So just to say now at contact, it can be really amazing how much that cleans up issues of timing, just because the word now is maybe the greatest word for helping you to be in the moment. And, the interest, and now I think it's really interesting, the origins of this. So these are things that were happening in the 1920s. And then in the 70s, when the inner game of tennis came out, all the conventional wisdom was that was woo-woo, that it was strange. It was not conventional wisdom, and a lot of people poo-pooed it, but now what we're finding is it fits perfectly with neuroscience. And I not long ago maybe 2 years ago, I had a conversation with Dr. Peter Fatty, who is a consultant with Major League Baseball hitting instructors. He's a visual expert in neuroscience, and he was talking about how it's the ability of baseball players to understand the arc of the ball that makes them effective. And whenever a pitcher throws a ball that very closely approximates the average pitch, then it's extremely hittable for a major league player. So if that pitcher throws a 95-mile-an-hour fastball and it goes into the sweet spot of where most 95-mile-an-hour fastballs go, then you're looking at a really good chance of a double, triple home run. It's the shots that aren't average. It's the pitches that aren't average that are the outliers that are almost unhittable because the players can't recognize them. And So, and I think tennis players think sometimes very similarly to baseball hitters. And so I think it was, who was it? I forget which baseball player it was, but it was an all-star hitter. And he was talking about a pitcher who had a rising fastball. Now, that's not possible because all fastballs fall. All fastballs go down because they can't go up, right? Gravity, right? But the phenomenon was that compared to the average pitch, this pitcher's fastball didn't fall as much. It might have had a little bit of underspin on it, keeping it up, and then not only that, but combined with the velocity and, other factors in the delivery, the different angle of the hand at release can make a difference there. So, but the batter perceived it as being rising because it didn't fall as much as other pitches. And this also points out a really big advantage that can be made in tennis. And I think we're seeing pros do this more and more, is changing the spins on balls so that it's a more difficult to read, a more difficult placement. So if you're familiar with Chuck Tomlin and the idea of the draw and the fade, right? So at certain times, intentionally or unintentionally, so this is my thing, is I believe that many times people unintentionally put side spin on the ball because they have to, and that's fine. But the intentionality of changing up the spins and the speeds so as to create outlier shots is really huge. And that takes other people out of their rhythm. And, when people look at Nadal, they see grinder, they see heavy topspin, they see, for a long, long time, heavy topspin to the backhand. Pretty simple, no? But in reality, if you watch Nadal live, it's a much different effect than watching him in two dimensions, because when you watch him live, you start to see the intentionality of how he varied his top spins so as to give different heights of balls, different speeds, different heights, speeds, locations, so that the other player just couldn't get comfortable. And so they couldn't really dial in their contact point. And part of what made the Federer Nadal, and even in the Nadal and Djokovic matchups so compelling is that Federer and Djokovic were maybe the two best ever at getting in position for the ball. Federer largely with ballet precision and on balance, and Djokovic, hitting it in any position. I mean, that's kind of crazy how Plastic Man does that. So let's go back to the beginning. So question things. Here are my takeaways that I want you to take away with you today. All right. Question everything. Just, have a good question. Be respectful, of course. Right. But, this is one thing. I've received this compliment before I go to a conference. I ask a question. People go, "Hey, that was a great question." And it's like, but do it for everybody. Sometimes you can help a speaker out. Like, you know what? Seems like they missed a point, right? So you can help them out by going, "Hey, can you address this?" And then they do. And then they're like, "Oh, thank you," blah, blah, blah. Number 2, it's ball awareness drills are maybe the most important thing that you can do, because ultimately it's perception of the ball and reducing anxiety that are the two most important things that need to happen on a tennis court if you're going to train people well, right? It's not a 19-slide presentation on how to hit a forehand. That will not help you. And finally, make things your own. You find your own way and discover what your players need, and then take it to the next level. I mean, think about all the implications of, if one player's really good at getting in position for your standard shot, how are you going to mix things up? You need an arsenal. You need an arsenal. You need to be able to hit, slice here and top spin there. You need to be able to hit an angle and then a harder shot at them, and have some unpredictability to your game. And this is something that's coming into the game more at the pro level, is we're seeing a lot more cat and mouse kind of tactics. At the French Open, all 4 semifinalists did really a very nice job of drop shotting and then playing in close, whether pushing the ball down the line or, going for the extreme angle or doing the drop shot lob. We saw a lot of that. And guess who did the best? It was Djokovic. So that was a huge factor in his French Open win. And, to a lesser degree, we saw it at Wimbledon, but we're also seeing a lot of little cat and mouse games at the US Open. I think it was unfortunate that Alcaraz, I think, played too much into Medvedev's strengths, in that he went for too many extreme angles. And then that gave Medvedev everything he wanted to do. And it seems to me, Medvedev is like, okay, thinking, what's the next weird, unexpected thing I can do now? And so he's playing on that. And I was hoping, and it seems like he did it, that Djokovic would do something to thwart that. And the thing that surprised me was the serve and volley play. But, that in hindsight, it was genius, because what does Medvedev want to do first? He wants to make an angled return so he can get the angled game going. Djokovic selectively comes in and takes that, as a volley, and then blowing up Medvedev's favorite return strategy. And then the other thing was to keep Medvedev deep in the corners, because it's really difficult to play that that weird mix it up game and be disruptive when you're in the corner, because your options are so much more limited. So if you go back and watch that match, you're going to see a lot of Djokovic hitting the ball deep to corners to keep Medvedev back, to limit his ability to be disruptive. So thanks for all the interaction, everybody. Rich, David, I see 3 people are watching right now. I'm going to take this video and I'm going to post it, underneath that post on Facebook. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe, and LinkedIn, please like and share if you like. But hey, thanks for watching. This was longer than I wanted it to be, but I appreciate your engagement, and we'll see you in the next one.